Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our continued administrative response support session series for the 2021-22 school year. My name is Rosie O'Brien-Wojtek, and I'm the Assistant Executive Director for the Connecticut Association of Schools. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this early childhood professional learning opportunity for administrators of school-based early childhood programs. Today's session is responding to our youngest learners, adjusting our teaching to reflect what we are learning. Once again this year, we at CAS are very excited to collaborate with the Office of Early Childhood, the Connecticut State Department of Education, and the Regional Education Service Center's RESC Alliance to support the needs of all of Connecticut's youngest learners, including children with special needs and other vulnerable populations. During each of our monthly sessions this year, you will have an opportunity to reflect upon your current practices around specific topics, as well as to dive deeper into each topic and discover effective strategies and techniques based on research and best practices. Today, we will be focusing on specific topics related to teacher efficacy, developmentally appropriate practices, the increase in referrals for special education evaluation, and the impact of COVID-19 on how young children learn. You will also have the opportunity to meet with colleagues across the state to exchange ideas and strategies while you learn with and from each other, as well as with some of our early childhood specialists from the RESC Alliance. This is so much to think about as we design and implement teaching and learning during this 2021-22 school year, especially for our youngest students across the state. So we're really glad that you're joining us today. Just a couple of quick reminders. Everyone has been muted to begin with, but once you get into the breakout rooms, please unmute yourself to talk with each other. If possible, please turn your video on, as it's nice to be able to see everyone, especially when we're working in small groups. When we're working as a whole group, please ask questions in the chat or raise your hand with the button at the bottom of the screen to be recognized. Also, please use the chat feature to ask questions, share ideas, and let us know if you experience any technical problems during the Zoom meetings, as we will be monitoring the chat. However, when you're in the breakout rooms, the chat feature is only seen by the people in your breakout room. So if you have a question or you need help when you're in the breakout room, please use the help button and one of the hosts will help you. This webinar is being recorded, but only during the whole group activities. We're unable to record the small group conversations during the breakout room portion of the webinar. However, the rest of the webinar will be recorded and will be posted for future viewing on the CAS, OEC, CSDE, and RESC websites. So please be sure to share the link to the webinar with your colleagues once it's posted. And please invite your administrative colleagues to join us for future sessions. These sessions will be held on the first Thursday of every month from 9 to 10 a.m. Again, I would like to welcome and thank you all for joining us today. It's now my pleasure to introduce our facilitator for this continued conversation. Please join me in welcoming Judy Courteau. Judy is an early childhood special education teacher and early childhood consultant for Ed Advance. And now here's Judy.
Thank you very much, Rosie. It's so nice to have you all back here again, and I recognize a lot of faces and a lot of names. So this is our second administrator responsive support sessions for early childhood administrators and special education administrators. Last year, we called these sessions roundtable conversations, and this year we renamed the sessions Administrator Responsive Support to reflect the process we're using to guide these conversations. So I'm going to ask my colleague Jillian to share our PowerPoint and to bring up the slide. Thank you. So the reason that you're here today, I hope, is all for the same outcome. We're going to be discussing responding to our youngest learners, adjusting our teaching to reflect what we are learning. So what is it that is so special about responsive support, and some of the reasoning of why we wanted to rename this opportunity that we have to come together in conversation? So just take a moment to look at this quote by Lama Surya Das. So what we want is we want to be more mindful, and we want to be reflective about what is going on now for our students, for our teachers, for our families, and for administrators. And we use these observations to ground our actions in the present. This practice helps us to be more responsive and less reactive. It keeps us from falling back into old patterns. As we listened to your comments and read the surveys that you completed, certain areas bubbled up. We have many children entering kindergarten without any preschool or socialization experiences. We have a large number of children with behavioral issues and concerns. We have a lot of concerns about some of our children that may be at risk of delay due to environmental effects exacerbated by the COVID pandemic. And we have an increase in the number of preschool special education referrals and special education referrals across the board. And all of this has led to some low school morale. So the goal of this administrator responsive support session is to continue our reflections, adjust our strategies, and support each other. Throughout the next months, we will continue to elicit your feedback. We'll provide you with content and resources on best practices in early childhood, especially for young children with IEPs. We are going to provide opportunities for you to share and learn with your peers through small group discussions and then a large group share out. And additionally, this year, we are offering follow-up office hours after each session, not immediately after the session, but we have them scheduled out over the next few weeks. And you will have an opportunity to meet with each of the early childhood specialists at the RESCs, and we'll go over that schedule and how to call in at the end of the session. So on our next slide, I would like you to think about how we are going to adjust our teaching, how we are going to adjust our interactions, and what we are going to learn from all of that. So today's agenda is anchored in understanding and supporting teacher efficacy, developmentally appropriate practice, and using these practices to know our teachers, students, and families, and to reflect on how we can best meet their needs. My co-facilitator today is Jillian Mocha. She's a preschool special education teacher and an early childhood specialist from CES. Jillian joins us right out of the classroom, and she has been, along with all of us, experiencing COVID, but firsthand with her students and her families in a classroom. She has more than 15 years of experience teaching in an integrated preschool classroom and school readiness program. So Jillian is going to lead us through the next part of our session.
Thank you all for letting me join you today. How do we begin to address some of these broader concepts like teacher efficacy, developmentally appropriate practice, and thinking about what we know about how young children learn? This is really an opportunity to audit our practices and reflect on how they align with our philosophies and our understandings about how young children learn. We have to prioritize relationships. Teacher morale is at an all-time low. And we will review some research around some of the root causes and some solutions to that concern together here today. In the same vein as prioritizing relationships, we need to remember that partnerships with families, our partnerships with families, and set the expectations that we are on the journey with them through their child's development, and think about how our practices echo that statement. I wanted to share this quote with you all. I think that it really speaks to the foundational philosophy behind some of the research that's related to teacher efficacy. It highlights the power of relationships between administrators and teachers, teachers and teachers, teachers and students, teachers and families, and its direct impact on practice, human behavior, and ultimately learning outcomes. So it really highlights the importance behind how people remember how others have made them feel, or how experiences have made them feel. And that needs to be sort of at the forefront of how we approach these challenges that we face at this time. So when teachers believe that they are competent, their confidence in their ability to positively affect students increases. Low teacher morale can be attributed to many challenges, staffing shortages, which impacts available support or class sizes, mandates, budget cuts, the impact of COVID on students' skills and behavior. But collective teacher efficacy happens when teachers have influence over instructionally relevant school decisions. And the early research, many of which are shared here with you, and I will make sure to share them with you in the chat as well, suggests that the powerful effects of the simple idea that teachers' belief in their ability to positively impact student learning is critical to the actual success or failure of teacher behavior. So the articles that are here really reflect on the importance of relationships and trust between teachers and administrators, and encourages that teachers and administrators really make an effort to work together to solve these challenges, to question the status quo and reflect on the culture and the climate of your programs. When teachers feel like they no longer have a voice in their professional development, it causes them to feel like their work doesn't have meaning or value. And one of the strategies that's discussed in one of these articles refers to a practice called flipping the faculty meeting. So finding opportunities to take collective action using transformative and collaborative leadership strategies to empower teachers through leadership opportunities and build the collective capacity of staff. And this happens in this continuous process of supporting teacher efficacy. So beginning with that co-construction of a goal or an approach to a challenge that's led by a research-based strategy or program philosophy. And then in order for this approach to be effective, all members need to feel like they have an authentic voice in the process and understand their role and their value to the process in addressing the concern. It highlights the process of examination of practice, reflection, and analysis. Why did or didn't something work? And that continuous collaborative conversation around strategies to refine practice, take another step forward, and embracing that potential for failure and seeing the benefit in the growth of that experience. So it's really about that progress and not perfection, which is why the cycle continues. And it encourages us to make space and celebrate even the smallest successes. One of the articles specifically quotes that team members should take into account the simplest pleasures of working together through a challenge. So remembering in everyday living, people need to feel confident and competent, have autonomy and control over what they're doing and how they're acting, and feel connected through secure relationships with others. And this directly translates into our professional identity, and that it's developed in the same fashion. We strive for confidence. We need to feel secure in our work. Then we can act with autonomy and confidence in our ability to complete the work. We then learn and grow from the relationships and support that we get from others who have either walked the path before or challenge our thinking. And then with all of these things present, we feel a more sense of control. We understand the value in our work, and we want our work to be connected and relatable to others. So how can we take all these bigger ideas and translate them into how we best support teachers? The article linked here goes further into detail about how this can be accomplished, but it begins with the understanding that our teachers have met every challenge with gusto, operating on fumes, but maintaining a brave face for their students. And while over a typical summer, they have time to reflect and think about what they want to do better or differently. At the end of this summer, our teachers were still navigating the trauma of the past year and a half. And it's not your usual time for reset and refocus and recharge. And that's where our teachers are right now, and it is unsteady. There's uncertainty in what the 21-22 school year will bring, that uneasiness over how effective we were during virtual learning, and we're still in that discovery phase of COVID's long-term impact on young children and families. And as leaders, we need to support staff and acknowledge that our teachers might still be in survival mode. So what can we do, right? Now, what are those actions that we can take to support our teachers? One of those is pumping the brakes, but what does that mean? Focusing on skills that really matter for young children's foundation of learning. That's where the idea of questioning status quo really comes into play, looking at instruction and assessment and where we're placing focus and value. Leading with love, creating time to be present in classrooms and connected to teachers, and how supporting and valuing those creative, collaborative relationships. So either through mentoring or committees where teachers are addressing challenges, working together and growing together, thinking about incorporating some of those things. And then honoring the work. People need to have their efforts feel seen, heard, and valued. And that really connects back to the teacher efficacy research that we shared earlier. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Judy, who's going to talk a little more about developmentally appropriate practice.
Thank you, Jillian. So it's really important to ground our understanding of young children and how they learn. And one of the great resources that we have is a publication by the National Association for the Education of Young Children called Developmentally Appropriate Practice. So the first position paper came out in the 1980s, and it has since been revised twice, and now it's in its third revision, and it is available right now. So what is developmentally appropriate practice? It promotes each and every child's optimal development. It's grounded in current child development, learning, knowledge, and it is based on current resource. And in the knowledge that professional early leaders gleaned from their observations of and interactions with their children. So if you look at the title page of this booklet, you can see that developmentally appropriate practice is guidance for children birth through age 8. And looking at those best practices. So where are those children? So when we think about our schools, we know they're in preschool classrooms, they're in kindergarten classrooms, they're in first, second, and third grade classrooms. So it's critically important that we all look at that continuum of learning between birth and age 8, and that we're grounded in sound early childhood practices. And we do know that best practices change over time. And that's why now is an opportune time for us to be reflective of what we've experienced through COVID and our connections with families and interruptions to the classroom learning, and to really consider how we can embrace what has happened and move forward in a way that is really reflective and positive in understanding our children and knowing what teachers need in order to take this perspective. So in the new edition, there are a couple of additions to there, and one of them is around the focus on responsive relationships. And I think that's interesting because our sessions are around responsive relationships with you as well. And understanding that responsive relationships are the key to joyful learning. Building a community of equity and belonging. And there's also guidance in there around the critical use of technology and the ethical use of technology and media in early childhood. There are 9 principles of developmentally appropriate practice. You can look through them. I've highlighted some of the important areas of that, but I want to put special attention onto play. So we know that play promotes joyful learning. It fosters self-regulation, language, cognitive, and social competencies, as well as content knowledge across disciplines, and it is essential for all children ages birth through 8. And I'm going to add that it's also essential for adults. So if you can recall a time when you were feeling very stressful and overwhelmed, and what is it that you needed to do? You needed to do something for yourself to occupy your brain and to focus all of that energy and excitement. And perhaps you went for a run that was fun for you. Perhaps you went for a swim. I went and played golf. My golf game was terrible, but I had so much fun being out there and just enjoying the sun and the leaves and losing my ball and having to take a penalty for it. But it was fun and I enjoyed that. The other principles that we want to focus on as well are understanding that children are active learners. They are constantly taking in and organizing information to create meaning through their relationships, their interactions with their environment, and their overall experiences. So this is really critical in recognizing that many of our children didn't have opportunities for interactions, even with their environment. They weren't going to the grocery store with their parents anymore, or they weren't going to library story hours. They were really isolated. So it's important to recognize that and to know that we need to enrich their experiences and know that it is through that relationship of experiences and being with them in those experiences that will foster children's development. The other slide that is critical is looking at this principle of development and learning advance when children are challenged and they achieve just beyond their current mastery level when they have many opportunities to reflect on and practice newly acquired skills. And this is true for our teachers as well. So as we move through this reconfiguration and transforming and thinking about our instructional strategies, we have to recognize that it's going to take reflection and it's going to take a lot of practice. So let's look a little more deeply at play. So play is the highest form of research, and that was stated by Albert Einstein. Dr. Peter Gray identifies 4 essential elements of play. They are that it is self-chosen, that it is imaginative, that it's intrinsically motivated, that it's structured and defined. And the structured and definition of play comes from the child. It does not come from the adult. So these essential components are really critical. Sometimes we think we're offering play opportunities in our classroom when really it's more teacher-directed activities as opposed to it being a child choosing the materials they want to play with. A child's relying on their own imagination to build their understanding, and it is initiated by them, and therefore it's initially intrinsically motivated and joyful. Play is also universal, and it is a natural, differentiated experience. So if you look at this picture, you can see that there are a variety of age ranges here. We have a toddler, we have maybe a 3, a 4, or a 6-year-old, and every single one of those children is involved in that experience. They have access to the same experiences as other children have at different levels. And so it is a perfect opportunity for differentiation. The Connecticut supplemental documents related to the Connecticut ELDS include building meaningful curriculum, and it identifies play as the most important defining behavior of a young child. Research shows that it cannot be replicated by any other activity. Play contributes to and enhances all areas of development in young children. When children are working in play-based learning centers, they play with materials and ideas, they interact with peers, and through play, children construct their meaning and understanding of the world, they recreate their knowledge, they employ their own rules, they make ideas part of their reality and discover solutions to complex problems. Children learn cooperation, problem solving, language, mathematics, scientific concepts, and they also learn to express and control their emotions. So it's really important that we look at this vehicle of play as one of the key components to assessing our students, knowing where they are, observing them, and allowing them to have uninterrupted extended periods of time for play. And I think that one of the things that we're feeling is that tension in schools about many skills that children are lacking. And there's a propensity to kind of move towards teaching those skills in isolation. And what we need to recognize is that children don't learn in isolation. None of us learn in isolation. We really need to provide rich, engaging, and creative experiences for children and be in those experiences with them. And so there are resources at the end of the slide that will connect to developmentally appropriate practice. And there's also a video in which Dr. Gray talks more in depth about the elements of play. So we are going to begin to talk about, have an opportunity to be in our breakout rooms. And Jillian, you're going to talk first a little bit more about how this impacts how children learn and what we can do to support them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Judy. So I think Judy brought up, some very good points about what we're valuing when we're looking at assessment of how children learn. We understand that children learn not only from experiences at school, but also that they learn from their day-to-day experiences. And if we pause to think about some of the impact that COVID had on some of those very brief early learning experiences, no more trips to the grocery store where they would be exposed to vocabulary and math and concepts of print, but also self-regulation and executive functioning, story hour at the library where they were learning how to be with other children and attend to an adult or another. And even though they were sort of taken away from that, they were still at home engaging in those intrinsically motivated opportunities for learning. So learning didn't necessarily go away, but I think that it is important that we reflect on and acknowledge what kind of learning experiences children have been engaging with up until this point. And it is that very self-motivated, intrinsic, explorative sort of learning experiences with whatever materials that they had available to them at that time. So we really need to step back and reflect on that and be able to meet children where they are within their zone of proximal development. Just as we would with any child who may be falling a little bit behind, we assess where they are along those learning progressions, and we try to scaffold their learning out from where they are currently. And I think that it also encourages us to sort of pause and remember that the impact of stress that COVID caused families and parents and caregivers, and what that does to the brain's availability for those cognitive and executive functioning skills, and how stress can trigger those fight or flight responses in the brain. But when students are engaged in that self-directed play, that stress melts away and their brain is so available to really absorb all of the content and the experience that learning opportunity provides to them. So it really, it really echoes, I think, what Judy shared so eloquently about developmentally appropriate practice and the foundational beliefs behind that. Students have been navigating the stress of caregivers and now teachers, so we need to try to find our way back to the joys of learning, and think about how teachers can also be a part of that conversation, but really focusing on that joy of learning and trying to figure out strategies for how we can bring that back to the forefront for students and for teachers. Okay, so what does this mean for instruction? So if we're recalling those characteristics of high quality learning experiences, They are self-driven, they're meaningful, relevant to the child's life or interests, they're play-based. Children have multiple opportunities to revisit and scaffold their learning beyond their current mastery. Experiences should integrate skills across a variety of domains. So we really need to focus on the depth of the instruction and not the pace. Let skill development and child interests drive learning along the progressions outlined in the Connecticut Early Learning and Development Standards. We need to take a step back and evaluate current practices around assessment. Are they aligned with the Connecticut Early Learning and Development Standards? Considering the value that we're placing on those naturalistic opportunities for assessing student skills versus those planned experiences, and how much more inherently valuable those natural opportunities for students to interact with materials, and what that is able to show us children are truly capable of doing independently. And then identifying and addressing gaps in learning using the progressions, and again, looking at that zone of proximal development. But it really provides the opportunity for us to audit what we value as early childhood educators, and then ask ourselves why. The article attached here encourages us to focus on commonalities that students share in times of crisis, not just their differences, and to really focus in on how young children at this time are really the same. I think we're so quick to jump to how different things are now, but when we really look at how children are developing, it's not so different as before. It just may be at a different place in this time and at this moment. But young children still learn and develop in the same way as they did before. And we need to remember that the purpose of early childhood education is to really establish those foundational skills that children need to prepare them to access future learning. We want students to have cognitive flexibility and inquiry and intrinsic motivation, persistence, and problem-solving skills. So we need that they'll need to face those greater challenges as they move forward in their educational experience. So when we look at that goal being the ultimate goal, what matters most skill-wise to students? Is it letter recognition, or is it self-regulation, emotional expression, empathy, self-confidence, and how that shift can affect planning and instruction?
All right, so now we are going to get ready to go into our breakout rooms. So I'd like you to reflect on the content that Jillian and I shared with you around teacher efficacy, developmentally appropriate practice, the impact of COVID-19, which we are continuing to live through, and what does this mean for teachers and students? And as administrators, how are you currently supporting teachers? And as you reflect on what we talked about, what strategies might you want to try? So Jillian just dropped into the chat Google Doc, which is a note catcher. So as you have your discussions in your breakout room, please choose someone to record your thoughts on the document, and then we'll be able to share that. Everyone simultaneously will be able to add to that document. And so we'll be able to look at it when we come back into the larger group and have our share out. You're going to have about 15 minutes. We wanted to give you a good chunk of time to really process and to have deep conversations. And then we will return to our large group. So if you're all ready, when the invitation comes up, please go into your breakout room. Thank you. Okay. Okay, all righty. And I don't think that we lost anyone. We seem to all be here, and welcome back. Is there a way, Jillian, to bring up the note catcher so we can review what people had put into it?
Yes, I'm going to do that right now.
So I was reviewing this as you folks were having your discussions, and I hope that that was enough time. Sometimes we end up not having enough time. Sometimes we have too much time. But as I was monitoring what was being put into the chat, into the note catcher, I did notice that people were still contributing. And my alarm is going off. Sorry about that. Okay. So some of the things that came through, I saw some comments in there around play-based instruction and getting permission to have play in the classroom. And I think that's monumental, because we really need to understand that play is essential, and it is one of the most effective vehicles in which children learn all of that they need to learn to be effective learners and contributors in our classrooms. As Jillian had mentioned, all of the things around self-regulation. We've talked a lot about the young ones coming into our classroom who have not had socialization opportunities before, and what a rich experiencing helping children to join into play is, and how critical that is for children to be able to then grasp other concepts. They need to feel comfortable, they need to be engaged, and I certainly believe that they need to be joyful. And when you have a joyful classroom, I always say happy children, happy teachers. So it helps us to feel more excited about the wonderful work that we are doing. I'm going to ask any of you now to just unmute your microphone if you would like to highlight any of the ideas or strategies that you suggested, or expand upon them a little bit, or make general comments. I know a lot of you are continuing to look at them.
One of the things that we discussed in terms of supporting teacher efficacy was looking at growth and not just achievement, not only looking at sort of benchmarks and whether or not kids were meeting those, but looking at how much they had grown or improved or grown their skills since they arrived.
Exactly.
I was also jumping off of that, Amy. I'm Amy, also talking. I was having a meeting with my staff and asking them to just tell me one thing that they saw as a positive in a student, any student, remembering that little tiny steps for 3 and 4-year-olds at our meeting is always a big step. So could be a little step in potty training, a little step in sorting items, but anything that they were just proud of their children in class. And everyone was able to find something. And that, I think, really gave them the sense of, you know, in the short period of time in school, I've made some achievements, and I'm proud of what's going on in my classroom.
Absolutely. Thank you, Amy.
The other piece that I think we talked about is about also celebrating teacher success and having them focus on something that they really feel good about in their classroom. And just for leaders to spend time in the classrooms and give them some positive feedback about what they're noticing and seeing. I think teachers need that now more than ever.
Absolutely. And Kimberly, what's really important about that too is that the leaders and administrators who are coming into the classroom are grounded in appropriate practices for young children. So they recognize that when they come into the classroom and the teacher is in the block area on the floor with the children, and right, you have children engaged and active and talking all over the room, they don't say, I'll come back when you're teaching. They understand that this is the richness of the classroom. This is how learning happens for our young children. And attached to that, also focusing on the fact that we are talking about children up to the age of 8 and how important it is for them to have these experiences. And I was wondering, as I looked through the note catcher, I was wondering if there were any strategies around vertical articulation. So I know it's important to bring back what you're learning and share that with your kindergarten teachers, but don't forget that we have our first and second grade teachers and third grade teachers as well, where all of these practices are really critical. Okay. Anything that you see popping up, Jillian, that we might want to expand a little bit more on?
In our group, we didn't, unfortunately, we didn't get, we didn't put anything, we didn't connect with the notes, but one of the things that was really important was we were talking about, like, sometimes when you're meeting them where they're at, you're looking at developmentally appropriate practices that are younger than a 3-year-old, and that's okay, and giving your teachers that it's okay to go back and you have to meet them where they are, and really that relationship building and giving them time to build relationships with their children, and it has to start there.
Right. And the Connecticut Early Learning and Development Standards do have those progressions from birth through age 5. So it's really easy to see where children are, and also to recognize that that's part of the progression. That's part of the progression. And the other important piece is giving yourself understanding that observing children and watching them is rich assessment information, especially around play, as it includes all of the domains. So really recognizing that the skills you bring to the classroom are that you are the facilitator of their learning. You have designed the environment. You've prepared the materials ahead of time. You've got plenty of child choice, so that now your job is to sit back, be reflective, and observe. And I can't highlight enough how important it is that we have that extended period of time for children to engage in play. And most of the recommendations are around 45 minutes to 60 minutes and longer. So recognizing that you are carving out a big chunk of time for children to have those experiences. Okay, and any last thoughts as we conclude today's session? You can put them in the chat, or you can just do a shout out. And Jillian is going to talk a little bit about our resources, our next administrator support office hours.
Yes, before we go our separate ways, I just wanted to remind everyone that there is available office hours that are shared here. You can feel free to join any RESC. It doesn't have to be the one that's only in your location, anytime that's convenient for you. So take advantage of this. It's just an opportunity to continue these discussions and highlight any needs that you're experiencing that we can try to anticipate for and address during this time that we have together.
What I'm noticing on that other slide, Jillian, is that we do have the times, and we do have the days of the week, and you can join any of the RESCs. You don't have to, if you're in ACEs, you don't have to just only go to ACEs, and that's why we provided the variety of them. But I also noticed that the slide doesn't have the links. So we'll add the link to the PowerPoint, and you are going to get this PowerPoint with the resources after the session.
And then this is just a reminder of all the dates that we'll be meeting coming up. It's the first Thursday of every month. So just you can make note of those in your calendar and plan to join us again. These are some of the resources that were shared today that Judy mentioned will be shared with you following the meeting. And then we would just like to ask if everyone would take a quick moment. I will also drop the link in the chat for the survey. This is just another opportunity for you to share any other topics that you would like us to address, because the objective behind these sessions is really to cater to your needs and what you're experiencing and how we can best be supportive of you in your practice. So, and thank you everyone for contributing today. I really thought it was really powerful discussions.
Thank you everybody for giving your time and your thoughts and sharing with your peers.